That's all I say. I mean, because there's an incredible amount of misconceptions, all stemming from media. Ordinary citizens, including my neighbors and others, would say, how can you go to a dictatorship? Why do you go there constantly? It's completely. And I say, excuse me, go there for yourself and see, because that's the only thing that'll convince you. And I tell you, Pascal, I have not met anyone who went to China, travel around for 2 or 3 weeks, either by group tourism or individually like I do, and came home and said, yeah, it was a terrible place. People were very unkind. They all repressed. They all looking gray. It's a clear dictatorship like, Czechoslovakia during the Cold War or Soviet Union. I've never met anybody who came home and said that. Everybody comes back and say, it was totally different from what I read in the media. It has nothing to do with all these stories. And I'm not exaggerating, Pascal. I know lots of people who have not been to China and they have very negative views. And I know even more people who've been to China, travel around, had a reason to go there for business or tourism or whatever, and they come back with a completely different. I'm not saying everything is okay. I mean, this is not the point. The point is that which I phrase, and to everybody I talk with, I say, you don't have to be pro-China. You don't have to be anti-China, but you have to be curious about China, because it is a fundamentally important country for the future of the world, whether you like it or not. Better learn about it. And second, and learn not from the media. It's impossible to sit in the West and learn about China. That much I can say. You have to go there. And the other thing is that it will enrich your life to meet the Chinese and see what they have done the last 30 to 40 years. It is unique, as far as I can see, in human history. Now, I sound over positive, etc. But I have seen China in 1983 when I traveled around with a Danish cultural delegation. I saw the poverty. I saw the dirt at the hospitals. I saw the muddy roads. And today, 40 years later, I see the incredible infrastructure, 40,000 kilometers of high-speed trains. I see cleanliness everywhere. I don't see a piece of paper on a railway station. I see happy people. I see consuming people. I see people who have the basics. I see a country in which there's no more poverty. There is huge contrasts, but there's nobody who suffers. There are people who live completely different lives from Shanghai and Beijing or Hangzhou or whatever. And I went to a small village in the outside, 70 kilometers outside Hangzhou, with 1,500 inhabitants. I tell you, that's a small place. The ancient village Shenao, with 1,500 inhabitants. I lived there for 4 days at a small hotel, and it's the same that people live a very good life. But they live as handicraft people. They live on cultural festivals. They live on cultivating the soil. But there's nobody who's suffering, and people look happy, and people are kind and helpful. Let me give you an example of I don't know how many I've experienced like that as traveling alone. I always travel on my own, and I don't plan where I go. I say in the morning to the receptionists, the day I've arrived, I said, tell them I would like to go tomorrow morning and see the sunrise over the Fujun River, which, by the way, that's for another story, but it's part of the art history of China and a modern film, which is called Dwelling in the Fujun Mountains. But that's what stimulated me to go to that place. I say, I'd like to go and see the sunrise. And it was supposed, since I'm a photographer also, it's supposed to be a place where you see the mist and there's a special atmosphere and all that. That turned out not to be so. Can you get me a taxi tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock so I can go to the river? And both of them say, like stereo, you don't have to have a taxi. We'll take you there. 5 o'clock in the morning, the receptionist say, I'll take you there. This is what you experience again and again in China. I'm not romanticizing. I can give you other examples. There is no discussion. It's a very kind and helpful people. They speak a little, not in the village, but some people in the big town speak English. They have English names, and they are going out of their way to be helpful, kind, and to learn from you. That is what is so interesting. They want to learn about us. They want to contact. My wife once said at the Hangzhou railway station in Shanghai, and a lady comes up and says, may I sit here and exercise my English with you? Where are you from? It is totally amazing openness, which a Chinese would not meet in Sweden. They built in peace in social actions, in economy, in the way the society is built. They don't have a lot of what I would call the Western repair society, by which I mean, first we have a defense policy. That means I can kill you thousands of kilometers away with offensive deterrence and long-range weapons. That's the NATO in a nutshell. That's offensive deterrence, far away. If you don't do what I say, I can kill you far away. Which will never, I mean, it should be pretty obvious that will never create stability. Now, then we do that, we get an overarmament problem, we get a militarism problem, and we get wars. And then we say, oh, we need disarmament and peace negotiations and all this, right? What about doing the right thing from the beginning? What about building these things into dialogue, into consultations, into institution building, where we handle conflicts before they break out in violence? And that's a very important distinction. That's the one between conflict and violence. I'm not saying, and that is one of the things I raised in the conferences in China, both of them. I said, it is amazing that among all the things you have imported to China, capitalism, the idea of a party, consumerism, Western art, Western music, and then you have changed it. You've given it, Chinese characteristics. The only thing you have not changed is the importing of militarism, weapons, long-range weapons and all that. And then, of course, they would say something, well, ours are defensive. Now, nuclear weapons are not defensive. This cannot, by any definition, be called defensive. And other things are not defensive either. But basically, and you and I know that, and everybody knows that, which is why it's so ridiculous to call it a threat. China, it does not conquer the world, has only one base outside itself, its own country, etc. But they have a different conceptualization of peace and coexistence and listening to each other and dialogue than we have in the West. And that is interesting to me. What I don't understand is two things. Why it has led to basically the same type of military, weapons first security politics. And secondly, I'm surprised that, as far as I have been able to find out, Nanjing's university in China is the only one that has something like peace research. And actually, one of my mentors, Johan Galtung, was giving guest lectures there. There is no peace research. There's no peace and conflict studies anywhere, as far as I know, in China. And that is something I'm surprised of. This could be a way to profile China in the future, that among it, it has, of course, peace and conflict studies, reconciliation, forgiveness studies, nonviolence, etc., studied at its universities, because when you get to the think tanks and the research institutes, it is pretty traditional. I'm not saying it's not highly qualified. I'm saying that it is not infused with the values of academic peace studies. Individuals have it, but it's not institutionalized. So I'm working on the idea that maybe I can do a little thing of spreading peace and conflict studies in China, which I think would be some of the things I would be most proud of in my life if I could achieve that. So I'm saying it when I go to China, I speak with intellectuals and academics, and I do it with great respect, because their policies are different from the West, and they are objects of so much injustices. But I still think it would be a good idea to have academic peace studies in China. Over the years, probably since 45, 90% probably of the books that have been studied by 90% of the students in international relations, political science, doctrine studies, strategic studies have been American books, American scholars. Mm-hmm. And you know that China is also very open to Western scholars coming there, speaking, including, Henry Kissinger shortly before he died at the age of 100 years. And they revere these thinkers, Joseph Nye also, etc. Yes, and those influences, something we as scholars should I wouldn't say be anti, because a lot of good stuff has been produced in the United States. But the dominating role must go. There is so much else produced around the world by other scholars, whether in Africa or the Middle East or China or other Asian countries, that it's totally ridiculous that 90%, now I'm saying 90%, this is not empirically proven, but I would say at least I'm a product of it myself, but I'm also a product of the Scandinavian tradition of peace studies and peace and conflict studies that was associated very much with the name of Johan Galtung. I don't see why we should not have global learning and global authors and global books. This is totally possible today at our universities, but it looks like that when I see the curriculum for something called peace studies at a Swedish university. I'm just saying, one, it's not peace. Two, it's all culture-specific Western. There's nobody in Lund University who is studying non-Western theories of international relations or philosophy about peace or something like that, And that that makes us totally unprepared for the world that is emerging. The difference is that the Chinese know a lot about the West. They've imported a lot of things from the West and given it Chinese characteristics, but they have also a curiosity. First of all, if you are in a shopping mall or something like that, or a restaurant, you will hear Western music or Western inspired music. That's very clear. If you go to any big museum in a big city, at some point every year or every second year, there will be an exhibition of Western art. I mean, Shanghai's Modern Art Museum, when I was there, had a huge exhibition from a Paris museum about French Impressionism. Now, they have sent millions of students to the West who come back and speak English. I mean, you can go on and on and on. The Chinese know tons more about the West than we generally in the West, with exceptions of brilliant scholars who've been curious about it for 40 years or 50 years or 100 years or whatever. We know nothing about China compared with what China knows about the West. And that is going to be absolutely fatal for the Western world. Because of that knowledge, you can exploit and do the propaganda the Americans and Europe do against China. That's only possible because the population don't know anything about China. Otherwise, they would say, hey, that's propaganda. When you bring people together in some kind of equity relationship and cooperation, not, vertical exploitation, fragmentation, and all that imperialism does, because that has also the idea of cooperation, but it's north-south, and always been, and then we get the most out of it and they get less out of it, right? But if you do it horizontally and you do it with equality, equity, win-win, preferably 50-50, but that's difficult between a huge country and a small country, and there are details and all this that I don't know anything about. But when you do that, and I emphasize win-win, not win-lose, like in colonialism and imperialism, then you build a barrier against starting a war and start killing each other. You see what happens now. Hatred goes totally unlimited in Europe against Russia because there's no cooperation. If we had followed the German and Willy Brandt's idea that we need to cooperate with each other to keep the peace and not start a war against each other, we would have been in a much better place today. But the fools of the West and West started the NATO expansion, antagonized, confronted, humiliated Russia, and Russia reacted, in my view, the wrong way, but they reacted because we did not build cooperation. Now the idea is only sanctions, no cooperation, no energy, etc. We don't want to be dependent. The whole point is that the Chinese have seen, if you get people together, connect people, if they become mutually dependent, equally dependent on each other. You sell this, I buy this, I sell this, and you buy this, and we have a transport network, and we do this. Is what Xinjiang is about at the moment. It's going to be the most interesting province in China, in my view, in the future, between China and the West. When you do these things and you get to know each other and you cooperate every day, the chances that you start a war and start killing and start hating each other is much smaller than when you don't know each other, don't work with each other, or when you begin to exploit people. It is so, I mean, it's embarrassing to say anything this banal on your channel, but that is what it is. We don't understand that in the West. We think that dominating is good. We think that mission is good. Make other people like us. That's the worst thing of the Western culture, is the mission idea. They should be like us. The fourth world should be like the third should be like the second, and the second should be like the first, and we are winning. We have universal values. No, we don't. And the Chinese have understood that. If you try to dominate, if you try to export your own system, then you would only create animosity. Because who are we? Would we like somebody coming and saying to Swedish society that we should practice Sharia law with a missionary idea? No, of course not. So the idea is Chinese are saying, let's cooperate. You don't have to be like us. You don't have to have one party system. You don't have to be Buddhist. You don't have to be Confucianist. You don't have to be this and that. But can we do something together in unity and diversity, peace and diversity, not in uniformity? This is so fascinating for somebody who's worked his whole life with peace and what peace is. Peace is different from culture to culture. I think we're into something, Pascal, that others would call deep cosmology or ways of thinking or cultures, which we are increasingly dealing with at the Transnational Foundation, because we're sick and tired of the traditional superficial weapons geopolitical military commentarism that exists, that never gets to a deeper things. Why are things the way they are? And when you get there, you begin to discuss how can they be solved. All this commentarism about what Trump said yesterday, is not going to bring us anywhere. Not a good place, at least. And we are bad academics if we have no ideas about how to find solutions. It's a doctor, the same with a doctor who you go to and he tells you you're terminally ill and I can do nothing. I have no idea what to do. This is not the doctor you'd like to go to. So all these people who are talking about what was said yesterday and militarism and new plans for military security guarantees and stuff like that, in my view, are not getting anywhere. What we're talking about here is less conscious or even subconscious ways of thinking that influences the Western mindset. For instance, we divide everything into good and bad, no gray colors in between, male or female. We divide things into, what I'm saying, dichotomies are important. Instead of starting out saying everybody is a potential friend, you say everybody is a potential enemy. If you have Christianity, there can only be one God. If you are a Buddhist, there can be a little bit more things to believe in or figures to believe in. And this idea of conquering the world and making your own way of thinking universal is delusional. Gandhi was one of the first to point it out. We are not against the British. They can be here, but their system, the way they think, is something we don't accept in India because we have a different culture. So if you want to change these things and really come to what could be changed is the deeper way of thinking of the West, the things we every day take for granted, call natural. Oh, that's how it ought to be. And therefore China is a threat because it has different values and think differently from us. That's a huge limitation of the West. And you have people in NATO and elsewhere who've been saying, China is a threat because they have different values from us. I would say, wow, that's wonderful. They're different from us. Let's explore what that means. But because we are on our way down in the West, and all empires go down and the Western Empire is on its way down, we get afraid when somebody has better ideas or different ideas or do things in a different way, and we consider them enemies, right? And that is a civilizational, a Western civilizational disease. Instead of being curious about those who are different, we see them as potential or real threats and enemies. The same goes with immigrants, people from other cultures who come here. They are basically met with a negative attitude. Instead of being open and say, that would be fantastic. And we should be thinking it's fantastic because we have been living on those from other cultures. Earlier, you couldn't buy a shirt, you couldn't buy a transistor radio, you couldn't buy anything. You couldn't buy a car that was not halfway produced somewhere in the third world. Now it's all produced in China. We're so dependent in the Western world on there being a world of people and workers and others doing things that we consume every day. Tobacco, coffee, whatever it is. But we're not interested in who these people are. That is our great deficiency in the West. And we're going to wake up. Or if we don't wake up, which I don't think we do at the moment because we're so navel gazing, we're going to lose it.
Yeah.
And I think we are going to lose it. There is no openness at this moment really among politicians, scholars, or media for there being another non-Western world who do things differently, who does things differently from us. There's no such thing in our Western media. Open a Chinese media, go to the internet, open China Daily, open CGTN or whatever, and you see tons of things about the West. Open the Western media and you'll see nothing about China. If you do, it's only that it's a bad country and it's a dictatorship and they're doing this and that bad and they are a threat and we must arm against them. That's the only story. You don't see those stories in the West, in the Chinese media. Human rights activists or whatever it is, we are selling democracy. We, goddamn it, selling democracy all over the world as if it worked in our own societies. It doesn't anymore. It didn't even at the time when we did it. So yes, I think this is something that, Pascal, this is something that has to do with the danger of becoming number one. That is that you don't learn, you teach.
Yeah.
If you're number 10 in a system, you have 9 others and say, how did they make it much better than we did? We got something to be inspired by. But if you're number one, you teach and you don't listen and you don't learn new things. And that, of course, also, I mean, if you should transfer Western thinking on China, China will have to avoid that trap. Being the strongest, most influential country in economic terms, probably in sociological terms, in the way of doing things in the future, in the technological field, that there will be a risk that anybody who becomes number one loses humility, loses wisdom, loses caution, and say, we can do anything. I have good hopes that that will not happen, thanks to Confucianism, thanks to the harmony thinking, thanks to the peace thinking that is deep down in the Chinese culture. But you can never know exactly. You know, there could be a leader long after Xi Jinping or something like that who would have a different attitude from his wisdom and moderation. And so we got to help each other thinking of how do we avoid anybody falling into the trap of arrogance, of thinking we are the center of the world. Now, the bizarre thing for the West is we are what we call the Western world. Pascal, you come from Switzerland, I come from Denmark, live in Sweden. What we call the Western world is 12% of humanity. Now, my simple calculation is if those 12% are not more interested in the 88% and how they live than they are about themselves, 12%, they will lose. They will lose. Because you cannot, as a small minority of 12% in the world community of humanity, you cannot not be interested in the 88%, both if you want to dominate and if you want to cooperate in a multipolar, multinodal world in the future. The new world is either multipolar or non-polar or whatever, but it is not unipolar. And so the end of the US Western dominance of the world is very clear. The only ones who don't see it at the moment are the Westerners themselves, because this is the outlook we have on the world. And this is dangerous. This is a dangerous moment for humanity, because there's an empire going to go down, and we do not have a Gorbachev.
how would
We do not have a man of vision, of moral standing, and of humanity that Gorbachev was when he saw that the Soviet Union, the last Western empire, went down. Now the Western empire is going down, and we don't have anybody who would reach to his knees in terms of morals, vision, or humanity.